Ever since the 1990s, one of Sega's biggest departments is found within Sega CS Research and Development No. 2. That team would come to be known as Sonic Team. Initially formed in 1990 through the combined efforts of staff members at Sega, notably individuals like Yuji Naka, Naoto Oshima, and Hirokazu Yasuhara, with other famous members like Takashi Iizuka joining the team a few years later, this team is most famous for creating the eponymous Sonic the Hedgehog series of games. Despite the majority of the team's resume focusing on the lovingly named Blue Blur, the team is also notorious for creating other original games of varying genres, often carrying a small but very strong following. What were these other games, and why do they matter when discussing the history of Sonic Team as an in-house development studio? That will all be answered as I talk about the other games of Sonic Team.
Genesis does
16-bit arcade graphics.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does.
Sega's premier console, the Genesis, also known as the Mega Drive in Japan and PAL regions, is still beloved by many fans ever since it initially released in 1989. It has drawn many classics that put it into a tight competition with the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. As for Sonic Team, they never really ventured too far away from Sonic at first. Their first 4 games were Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Sonic & Knuckles respectively. It wouldn't be until 1995 when they released their first game, not including Sonic. That game that would release was none other than Ristar. Initially released on February 16, 1995 in North America. The idea for a character like Ristar came from a character planning session prior to the creation of Sonic the Hedgehog. When discussing the concept of Ristar, Yuji Naka stated, "At first, we used a character that looked like a rabbit with ears that could extend and pick up objects. As the game got faster and faster, we needed to come up with a special characteristic to give our character some power over his enemies. I remembered a character I'd thought about years ago, who could roll himself into a ball and slam into enemies. Hedgehogs can roll themselves into a ball, so we decided to go from a rabbit to a hedgehog." When first being developed, the character was changed from a rabbit to an anthropomorphic star named Feel. Compared to the final release, his design was radically different, and instead of using ears to grab onto enemies, Feel used his arms to latch onto them. Here are some of the prototype screenshots that showcase what the game looked like early on. The plot centers around an evil tyrant under the name of Kaiser Greedy, who corrupts the leaders of 6 different planets and even capturing the legendary hero. In an act of desperation, the locals send a plea for help to the hero's son, Ristar. His endeavors take him through the planets of Flora, Undertow, Scorch, Sonata, Freon, and Automaton, saving the leaders from corruption. After that, Ristar squares off against Greedy himself, defeating him, saving the day, and reuniting with his father. Well, at least in the North America version. Overall, the game was received well by critics for its graphics, gameplay, and music. Unfortunately, it was criticized for its short length. The game was also a financial failure, as many fans had their eye on Sega's next console, the Saturn. Despite the high cartridge price, the game is widely available through Sega Genesis collection packs. Ristar may not have had a large impact on the Genesis as a whole, but it would mark a huge turning point in Sonic Team. This would only mark the beginning of a golden age in Sonic Team's branch out from Sonic.
"1994 saw Sega's jump into the third dimension with the release of the Sega Saturn. Many people had high hopes for the Saturn, as it was said to be a stiff competitor to the Sony PlayStation, and the console had a very successful launch in Japan. Determined to gain a head start over Sony's soon-to-be-released console, Tom Kalinske, the then Sega of America CEO, announced that the Saturn was already released at E3 1995 and was retailing for $399 US. However, while this seemed like a valid marketing tactic, the plan would ultimately be one of the console's biggest misfires. Frustrated customers who wanted a Saturn had a lot of trouble, as only 4 stores carried the console on release and would ultimately be out of stock at most locations. Plus, the launch lineup was notoriously poorly received, as most of the games were subject to being rushed to release on launch with the Saturn. The PlayStation, on the other hand, was in no hurry to release right away and retailed for a much more affordable $299 US. Thus, the games released on launch could take more time to ensure their quality without having to follow a strict time limit. Also, the hardware of the Sega Saturn, while technologically impressive with the use of 2 graphic processors, made the Saturn very hard to develop for due to the use of quadrilaterals for 3D rendering compared to the PlayStation and N64, which utilized triangles, which was far easier to work with. Despite the odds of successful game releases being slim compared to the PlayStation, Sonic Team would not be deterred by the gravity of the situation. If anything, the Saturn Era is where Sonic Team took the most experimental approaches to their releases. Their first jump into the third dimension would come in the form of a flying action game that would go to be titled Nights into Dreams. Nights into Dreams was released on July 5th, 1996 worldwide. In an interview with Sega Saturn magazine, Yuji Naka talked about the concept of this game. He had said, "I headed back to Japan so that I could work with Mr. Oshima, and while I was waiting for the plane to take off, I thought, let's make a game where we can fly. So I guess that's where it all started." When he got back to Japan, the team analyzed works by Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, as well as Cirque du Soleil's Mystere performance to provide inspiration for the game's setting in Nightopia, where all good dreams occur. In Nights into Dreams, the player assumes control of one of 2 characters, Claire Sinclair or Elliot Edwards, as they travel to Nightopia to help rescue Knights, a non-binary creature, in exchange for helping them escape from their nightmares. Elliot wanting to win against some older kids in basketball, and Claire's wanting to overcome stage fright due to having a lead role in a play. In the game, Knights is one of the creations of Wiseman the Wicked, the evil ruler of Nightmaren, the evil part of the dream world. Knights and their brother Reala are tasked with taking over Nightopia and eventually conquering the real world as well. However, Knights rebels against this idea and ends up turning to the good side, opting to restore good dreams to Nightopia. As punishment for their rebellious nature, Wiseman traps Knights in a soul prison, which prompts Clarice and Elliot to free Knights and assist in restoring peace to the dream world. The protagonists hold an embodiment of a positive human trait, known in-game as an Idia. The red one, which embodies the trait of courage, is given to Knights, where they are temporarily freed from the soul prison and fused with one of the characters. From there, the player has a set amount of time to find the 4 other Idias within 4 other mares, or sections of the world, as well as getting as high of a score as possible by performing tricks in the air such as loops. If the player finds all other Idias, Knights will be freed from the soul prison, where they can take out the demons of Nightmaren, which act as the game's bosses, Reala and Wiseman included. Ultimately, after Knights defeats all bosses in Nightmare, Clarice and Elliot are free from their nightmares and overcome their fears. Upon the game's release, an analog controller was packed in with the game for easier control of Knights. The controller, fittingly called the Knights controller, would serve as the definitive controller of the console throughout the rest of its lifespan. The game received positive reviews from critics, often citing it as one of the best of the Saturn's lifespan. The game was praised for its visuals and soundtrack, though some complained of the controls being somewhat janky and the level design being nauseating. A spin-off called Knight's Journey into Dreams was released on the Wii in 2007. While it may have been a killer app for the Saturn, it just could not keep up with the rampant success of the PlayStation and the Nintendo 64. The Saturn was all but doomed, but Sonic Team had one more game they wished to release on the Saturn. "1998 saw the end of a failed console and the rise of a new one, hoping to salvage Sega's competitive ability in the market. That console would be the Sega Dreamcast, boasting a much more impressive launch lineup, including the highly anticipated Sonic Adventure, serving as Sonic's proper jump into the third dimension, as Sonic 3D Blast was technically his first, but ended up being a failed attempt at bringing the Hedgehog to a new perspective. Before Sonic Team was ready to move on to the Dreamcast, they somehow managed to squeeze one more release into the Saturn before moving on. In 1996, after the release of Nights into Dreams and the Christmas Nights expansion, Sonic Team got to work on a game featuring a slightly more realistic set of protagonists. It was then that Sonic Team started work on a game centering around a team of firefighters. After 2 years of work, Sonic Team would release Burning Rangers on February 26, 1998 worldwide. Sega Saturn magazine did a Q&A with Yuji Naka about Burning Rangers. He wanted to make a set of protagonists that revolved more around saving people rather than destroying enemies. He was quoted as saying the following: "We wanted to create a game where you could rescue people. Nowadays, there are so many games where you just kill people. Instead, we decided to make a rescue game." In addition, right from the start, it seemed that fire was the most appropriate way to create that sensation of fear and tension. So in the end, we combined these two elements. He also elaborated that the name Burning Rangers was derived from Burning having a sort of go for it type of personality, while Rangers being sort of a note on both park rangers protecting land from forest fires and heroes akin to that of the Super Sentai genre of TV shows, which was very popular in Japan throughout the late 90s. Burning Rangers was sort of a far cry from other Sonic Team games, focusing more on exploration of the levels at a slower pace rather than the speed of Sonic the Hedgehog and Nights into Dreams. Plus, the game was a third-person shooter and had no defined antagonist, helping to make the image of the Burning Rangers as respected firefighters all over Earth more realistic, instead of a group of heroes focusing on one source of evil. The player controls one of two characters, Sho Amabane or Tillis, the two newest recruits of the Burning Rangers. They are guided through training, meeting the other Rangers along the way, Chris Parton, Reed Phoenix, and Big Landman. Chris is the game's mission control, providing guidance on where to go and what the player's current objective is. Reed teaches basic maneuvers, such as moving and jumping, as well as avoiding fires that explode out. And Big serves as a veteran firefighter, often providing assistance to the team as needed. By using blasters they are given, fires can be turned into energy crystals, which serve as your health in the game, as well as being used to transport civilians at the respective locations to hospitals. Combat is mostly divided between two attacks: a light attack that, while it doesn't do much damage, gives the player energy crystals for their troubles, and a heavy attack that, while its damage is far greater, will not give the player energy crystals. Thus, players have to think about which attack will be best for the situation at hand. After training is completed, the group is immediately thrusted into 4 levels throughout the game, with each mission slowly becoming more complex, such as traversing through a botanical research facility which caught fire because of a giant carnivorous plant, to a mechanical fire in an aquarium where the facility was thought to be closed, but there were tourists that were caught there, making the mission much more complex. Eventually, either Sho or Tillis encounters a girl named Iria Klein, who is placed into space because of an incurable disease, to which Iria informs that her ship is set on a crash course to Earth, where it will desolate the planet if it crashes into Earth. Eventually, the Rangers are able to stop the ship from crashing into Earth. Iria is cured of her disease, and she joins the Burning Rangers as a trainee, while Sho and Tillis officially become full-time members. It's very possible that the mechanics of the game would go on to inspire the E102 Gamma stages and the Mech Shooter stages in Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 respectively. Also, the idea of a space station crashing into Earth is possible inspiration for the last story in Sonic Adventure 2 as well. Alas though, Burning Rangers was well received, with one critic from GamePro magazine under the alias of Major Mike praising the game as a roaring good time, though criticizing the game for having tepid controls, recommending that players play through the training stages multiple times before diving into the game. However, because the Saturn was considered a dead console in favor of the Dreamcast releasing in a few months, the game sold very poorly. According to PriceCharting.com, a loose copy of Burning Rangers currently retails for approximately $205 US, with a complete in-box copy retailing for $525 US, making it one of the most valuable games on the Saturn besides Panzer Dragoon Saga.